And Matt's gonna start us off, so you can turn the camera to face him. Oh, there, he's right there.
Yeah.
It's backwards.
Yeah.
You're on camera
I'm
too.
not used to this.
I know, it's so.
It's easier with a box.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the August Curriculum Committee meeting. My name is Matt Marshall and I represent Gardner.
And Nicole Medor, West Gardner.
My name is Tony V. I'm for Gardner.
I am going to get better at this, guys, I promise.
Bear with us. This is the second run of,
There you go.
of an actual meeting in here with the camera. So
You're so close.
Matt, can you scoot over a little bit toward Angela?
Well, it's Tony we're
Tony.
missing. Go a little bit the other way.
There you go, that's great.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And I'm Angela Hardy, the Director of Curriculum. Thank you for your patience as we learn the new system.
Nancy Fortier-Brown will be joining us momentarily. She's on her way from work. So we're gonna actually start with a non-voting agenda item. And then she can review that potentially later on when she gets home on the YouTube video. So Angela.
And I did want to say that Teresa Garrett apologizes for her absence. This evening, she was hoping to be able to join virtually, but our policy doesn't support that quite yet. Okay, Terry, I would like to be able to present something on my screen, so I will plug in. Oh, no. Oh,
Give me
Terry,
1 second,
I can't plug in.
give me 1 second.
It's okay, I can't plug in. I don't have the right dongle, Terry. I don't have the right dongle or the right computer.
Yeah, that's a USB-C. We're out to lunch here.
My computer's upstairs. We're doing really well at this live streaming business.
It's a shift back to like this,
Yeah, it is.
well, what was sort of normal, but now it's new.
We struggled in the beginning with the virtual side of things. That's gonna take a few to get back. We'll get
It's seasons.
I was feeling really prepared until this minute.
I guess you're just gonna have to talk it through like you always do
I
so
know,
well.
But,
Does the USB
Give
come
me
out of
1
that?
second, Angela, you can share, give me a second.
okay,
There you go. Follow those instructions. Go to share.zoom.us.
okay. .us. Meeting ID. Is that the sharing? Oh, I see.
967-3809-6385.
Very cool.
Just getting started.
I'm learning how to do this properly. And now you can let me in. Welcome, Nancy.
Mhm.
We're very close.
I'm gonna turn your sound down so that we don't get a lot of echoing.
That. Sweet. Okay, I've got it as big as I can get it. I will walk you through this. This one's harder to read than the others. So this is our non-voting item, and just we reordered the agenda to put this one first. So this whole meeting, you will note, is related to our high school. And sometimes when things fall near teaching and learning, this committee has an opportunity to review the materials and provide input in the absence of other committees meeting so that we can move the work forward. And one of the things we realized during the pandemic is that the handbook is approved annually by the board, but we don't go through it line by line. And so there are a few areas in the handbook that we've decided, given the number of questions we've had and the amount of feedback we've had, we think it's best to bring it to the attention of the board or a committee on the board to use your perspective to make sure everything seems in alignment with our policy's intent. And the one area that's sort of indirectly related to policy are the attendance procedures. We have a lot of procedures written out for us through the Dropout Prevention Committee, through state law, and through requirements around attendance in general. So in this case, this is more of an awareness, and is there something that makes you wonder, so that we can edit before it launches. So a handbook follows a student for all 4 years that they're in the school, with some adjustments made annually and reflected inside the updated handbook following the class. So in this case, the attendance to school just starts by outlining the requirements that there's 175 days and parents are responsible for the attendance of students who are under 17 years of age. And that to be in attendance is directly correlated to student success. And so that's the opening, and that sort of follows the state's requirements. But at the high school, partly due to student maturity and the different way the system is set up, we wanted to be really clear about when a student might not earn credit for a course as it's related to attendance. So in this case, a student has to have, if they're absent 7 class periods for a half credit semester course that meets every other day, they aren't in attendance enough to earn the credit. So this is where it gets tricky. Credits are earned not just for the learning demonstrated in our system, they're also earned for seat time. And I know a few years ago under proficiency-based learning systems in the state, that was a big question. But in this district, the board agreed that it's both. It's both attendance and active participation and demonstration of learning. So that's why in this case, if there's 7 class periods missed for a half credit semester course that meets every other day, so it's like 2 full weeks of courses missing, then they wouldn't earn their credit. 7 class periods per semester for a full year course that meets every other day. And 14 class periods per semester for full year courses that meet every day at including the tech center courses. So that's just something to be aware of in our system, the seat time in addition to learning proficiencies. And then we outline for clarity for all of our families and students the procedures about attendance is taken at the beginning of class. If a student is more than 30 minutes absent, they're considered fully absent from the class. So they can be a little bit tardy and still have it count, because that happens. This does include excused and unexcused absences. And then if there are extended planned absences, they need to go through the administration so that it doesn't, if possible, it doesn't negatively impact their ability to earn credit. It sort of depends on what the planned absence is and what the intent is for the student to demonstrate learning and to make up some of the time. And so that's where this note is. And that way there, it provides a little bit of leeway if there's an extenuating circumstance. There is some administrative discretion that's again after extenuated circumstances. And so this is why communication between families and school personnel is really important, especially if the child is 17 or under, that the adult, the guardian, is in active communication with the school administration. There is a process for appealing, and it's laid out here very carefully about who's involved in that, including the teachers, the guidance counselor, and an administrator, and parents or guardians. And if, especially, we put credit recovery in here, there's a couple ways to earn credit recovery. That's if you're not earning credit because you haven't actively participated or you've been absent. And then there's also credit recovery if you've been in attendance, but your grades don't reflect the grades that are needed to earn credit. So it's outlined under absences. And it outlines exactly what the options are for earning credit, which does mean the student needs to attend in all cases the course or an alternate form of the course. And then waived and excused absences. We are required to identify every type of absence. And so this outlines what those types of absences are. And anything to be excused or waived has to involve the parent or guardian. And then the coding procedure. So if families are logging into PowerSchool, they can understand what the codes mean. And then here are the very specific examples of what warrants an excused absence. So like hospitalization, bereavement, illness, certain sponsored activities. And then it outlines the consequences for unexcused absences. And it's so that they can consistently apply them. Dismissals, and that they need to be approved by parents, families and guardians as well. And then in this case, it also outlines the responsibilities of the students to make up the work that's missed. And that's really at every grade level, right? This just at the high school level, especially with the credit bearing feature, we're very clear about the timeline established for students. And mostly that protects the students so that they don't get so far behind they can't get caught up and earn the grade that they could be earning for the class. So it does set some parameters. And that also includes assessments, otherwise known as quizzes, tests, written on-demand papers, that sort of thing. And then late work is very clearly outlined. And then what to do for incomplete grades. So we discussed incomplete grades actually on this committee a year and a half ago in March, when we were trying to understand how to manage incompletes due to the pandemic. And you established timelines for that, and there were extended timelines than this. So due to the pandemic, you gave them 6 months from each semester to complete that work. Whereas this is a much shorter timeline, assuming we're mostly all in person back in school. So this is what we plan on moving from here into the student handbook for this year.
How long are the periods?
80-minute periods. Yeah, and most classes are every other day, 80 minutes. There are some classes that are daily 80 minutes, or some that have a shorter schedule, or because like maybe they have a lab that extends even longer than that. So then it changes that 80-minute window.
The only other comment I would have, this looks fine, but of course, COVID, with everything starting to rear its ugly head again. I suppose kids can get COVID, or they could just get sick, right? For an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm. So how to
I'm
manage
assuming that are we gonna be offering, and this, I don't know if this is a discussion for here, but are we gonna be offering any type of virtual learning at all this year? Because I'd hate to think that a student has to quarantine for 10 days and then without any access whatsoever to their class. And it certainly should be excused, but it really doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, so on August 19th, when the full board meets again and has the data from the community, we definitely want to bring that specific question to the full board
Mhm.
with a recommendation. We don't have a decision made yet. I know one of the ideas that we're considering that I feel comfortable sharing is at least in grades 6 through 12, if a student is quarantined and that's the excusal, it's a quarantine situation, then or one of these extenuating circumstances maybe that's in here,
Mhm.
like the hospital.
Appendix burst, they're in the hospital for
Right.
2 weeks.
Then we would honor the synchronous learning opportunity like we did last year. What we are trying to understand is how to create some consistency in our learning spaces so that it's not optional if you come into school or if you do it from home. It's the first plan of action is to be in school. And only under certain circumstances, are people enabled to come in virtually to those learning spaces. And that's the part we need to work through and understand how to ensure equitable access to learning and under what conditions. So we don't have that recommendation fleshed out yet, but that's sort of what we're considering. In pre-K to 5, we're still in development on that plan. And that's mostly a developmental situation. While 4th and 5th grade did have some bright spots last year on synchronous learning into classrooms, it was rather tricky. Their schedules are set up really differently than 6 through 12. And their level of independence at home varies. Some 4th and 5th graders are really excel at that, and others are just not quite there yet. And that's okay, but we want to make sure that it's a quality experience for everyone. And manageable for our staff as well. So that part's in development.
Okay.
And that will certainly have to, whatever decision is made on the 19th will then have to be reflected in any documents sent out to families. So this, as it is here, I made a note, may need to be edited based upon the decisions that come out of that meeting. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions about the way attendance is handled? We're trying just to be better about extracting parts of the handbook that get the most questions and then increasing our communication around those parts.
I know that back when my kids were in high school, they would often take extended vacations. Their teachers would work with them, give them lesson plans. That was part of the deal for them to be able to go. And they completed the work, and is that also going to be an option?
Yep, so in here, it says, and you didn't get a chance to read this ahead of time, so I want to make sure we go right into it. So under absences that are excused would be a planned absence, personal reasons, including family vacations. And it says excused only because that means then you go up above and you would work. Here, under please note, you would, in order to get that excused absence, you would need to be working with your teaching staff, and the family guardians would need to work with the administrative staff to secure approval, which I would imagine would be, what is your learning plan to make sure you're still on track when you return, and that you're not falling behind in this curriculum. So I think that's set in as a safeguard, but it's all about proactive communication on all parties.
What's your experience with consistency? Because obviously some teachers are different. Do they go by the letter of the law typically, or is it a little?
Well, I think I'm still new when it comes to some of those like daily aspects in the schools, but knowing the administrative staff and knowing how they work with teachers, I would gather that they're fairly consistent. I mean, the departments are consistent within themselves. And the department heads work routinely with the administrators, so and we haven't had a lot of change of leadership at the high school, so I can follow up on that question, but from my limited experience, I think they're pretty consistent.
Okay.
I guess the only thing, if it's an 80-minute class and they miss 30 minutes, they're 30 minutes late, to lose the whole day is very, seems unfair to me. Because they're there for more than half of the class. It just seems unfair to me.
Or is that they'd be considered absent for that class, but then they're there for the next class in there? Or is that absence?
It's just for the one class period, the 1 80-minute class
Okay.
period. Yeah.
So even that 30 minutes, they'd sort of get an absent for that class, but they'd be counted in for the rest of.
But it affects that credit.
But it affects that credit, yeah.
Potentially.
And they should still come in, even if they're gonna be, like, don't just blow it off, right?
Now, back in the day, I would just say I'm 31 minutes late. I'm thinking I'm gonna go sit in the parking lot for a while.
Yes.
Of course,
I've done okay.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just a thought. I mean, I just feel like if they're there for more than half, then they should be given equal consideration.
So
How's that?
39 minutes instead of 30.
Well, it's 80 minutes, right? Well, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, what we can do is follow up and ask how 30 minutes was established. I know at the state level, or there's some guidance at like what constitutes a day. I'm not proficient enough to be able to say what that exactly is, and then how that translates to a 4-block day.
I think it also depends on the subject, you know, the class structure, and not all classes are led the same. So anyway, it is what it is, and it's worth noting.
I think you probably find that if a student's gonna be more than 30 minutes late or even close, they're probably just not gonna be there anyway, for whatever reason. I wouldn't think, you know what I mean? I don't know.
I've made my kids go.
You have.
I was that kind of mom. If they had a dentist appointment.
And then it comes
Right.
into my point of consistency with teachers, you know, if someone shows up at the 40-minute mark, that's okay today, don't do it again.
And like normally Chad would be joining us and he could answer that very clearly. He and Karen are actually at an emergency procedures training right now in Gorham. So, and that's still running at this hour. So, but I'm happy to follow up on these because this is a non-voting item.
It's
Just for
fine. I mean,
for
if
conversation.
everybody else is
But
fine.
I made note of it because I'd like to follow up with him and ask. Yeah. Great. So we will move into the items that do need some specific review. And so we're going to start with graduation requirements policy IKF and the high school class standing procedures. So I am going to change to what we sent out. I'll increase the size. And then I'll talk you through what I'm looking for from you. It's a little bigger. So graduation policy IKF has been reviewed a fair amount recently. So we've started to become really familiar with it. The part that we're looking at is specifically near the end of this policy, so I'm gonna scan down to it, but the policy basically sets how many credits students need to earn in order to earn a diploma in our district, because the state requires a certain number of credits, and the rest are required by this board to meet their graduation requirements. And then it specifically discusses community service hours, and one of the edits we made recently was how to adjust given the lack of opportunity for community service hours during the pandemic. So that's outlined very clearly in this policy rather than just in the student handbook. Okay, so that's one distinction. How students can earn credits in alternate ways, that's part of this policy. We haven't changed that much over the recent years. How IEPs play into the graduation requirements. The pathways students can earn credits. And then the additional considerations. So it's this section we want to look at. And specifically, we're going to look at G, sorry, there's no H. Honors and awards at graduation. So maybe I can make that a tiny bit bigger for you since we're kind of far from the screen. So this particular section of the policy has less information than what's in the handbook. So I wanted to make sure you knew what's in the policy. And policies don't usually delineate every aspect, and then how that plays out in a procedure that we've adjusted in the handbook for you to vote on today. So the policy states that we it hasn't been adjusted. Okay, so the policy states that we will have a valedictorian and salutatorian, and that they have to have been enrolled for 4 semesters preceding graduation. That's pretty typical in most schools. So someone's not coming in their last semester and then becoming the valedictorian, transferring from another institution. It also outlines the Latin honors system that you approved a few years ago, that we have 3 levels of a Latin honors system. And what you recently approved that is not in this policy that's being projected at the moment, but we will reference the meeting that it was, and we'll make sure when the policy gets rewritten, it's added and reposted.
And it makes it into the handbook.
It's in the handbook.
Oh, okay.
You know how many times I read this policy before this meeting?
Mhm.
Is the top 10. You decided in, was it April or May?
Well, it says it was revised April
think it was in
2021, so
April.
maybe it was in May.
I will look specifically, either
that time
April
frame, right before
2021
Yeah,
or May 2021, and I will go back and look.
I think it was early May.
I think it was May too. I think it followed the April meeting. You added that back in that we would recognize the top 10 students also at graduation. That we would do both. Is there any discussion on that part? So the way we'll proceed on that part is I'll go back to the meeting where you created the language. I'll make sure it's edited in here and we'll repost based on that so that and we'll set the date as to when you made that
And we
decision.
did that, did we do that for just last year? Is that how we did that?
We did it for that point moving forward
Yeah,
for
That's what I
now.
thought.
That was the
Until
motion.
unless you want to revisit it in the future. So that point moving forward, we'll do valedictorian, salutatorian, top 10 and Latin honors. And
I
then if someone,
understood why we did that too, because people had already had their hearts set on being 3, 4, you know.
and I think the biggest issue was the Latin honors piece wasn't in the old handbook. It never got updated, I don't think.
well, that's what we're gonna look at right now. I think it was updated, but the clarity of it wasn't like the details necessary for complete clarity wasn't effective. So what we're gonna do now is go to the handbook side. Again, you approve the handbook annually. So we've extracted the part that we've had challenges with, and it is below this actually when we sent out the agenda. So in the handbook, there's a section called class standing and a section called honors and awards, and they both reference the IKF policy, actually linked to what I just showed you, okay? And these are the updates. Mostly the updates are the words in bold on the first paragraph, and then so it helps clarify. So the senior class is ranked on their cumulative grade point averages during the spring semester of each school year. It will include the first 7 semesters, except for classes impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember that one semester, the spring 2020 semester, we either passed, incomplete, or failed, right? Is that how we did it?
Yeah.
Passed or incomplete, that's what it was, passed or incomplete students. And while their grades were evidenced on their transcript, they weren't included in the cumulative GPA. Okay, so the information will be used by school administration to recognize the top 10 students. So this is where the updated policy will marry, and students who earn academic honors using the Latin honor system for end of the year celebrations and ceremonies. So the first 7 semesters will determine for ceremonies who will be valedictorian, salutatorian, top 10, and Latin honors. So then that brings into question, what about that last semester of their senior year? Well, that is still credit earning time. And we really are, it's really necessary to document their work. And many colleges ask for their final transcript to be sent along, right? So it includes that last semester. So this is the language that's changed to make that really clear. These rankings and honors are not final and are subject to change based on students' cumulative grade point averages that include all 8 semesters, except for classes impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, that one semester. Yeah. Cumulative grade point averages and class rank will be finalized at the conclusion of each school year after teachers have verified their grades and all grades have been stored in the school's data management system. In our case, it's PowerSchool. And then IKF goes into the broad categories, valedictorian, salutatorian, and we'll have top 10, and then the Latin honor system. So before we go into honors and awards, is that clear? Because there is always a chance that students' cumulative GPAs change from semester 7 to semester 8. And technically that means on the transcript, it may change someone from 8 to 6.
My one of my children's graduating class, the valedictorian who got up and did the whole ceremonial stuff ended up ranking as number 2 after the 8th semester. So my only concern is how quickly are you going to get that before, and how will it impact the students at graduation?
So this is why we're trying to clarify it. For graduation purposes, it'll be whatever the GPA is at the end of 7 semesters. However, graduation happens before we close the books. Once we close the books, which is after all the ceremonies have been completed, that could change depending on that final semester for each of those students. Some students could go up from summa cum laude I've already got it all, from cum laude to magna cum laude, right?
Mhm.
And they won't have that extra quarter at graduation because it didn't happen until the books closed after graduation. Something still to be very proud of, something to be sent to remain on your transcript for life. But there's a chance the recognition might not happen at graduation.
So it's, sorry but it's funny, one of my children he moved up to number 11. And I have his report card, and that's what we go off of, not what it said, what he was told. We went with what it actually was. I guess you can do whatever you want to, right? So that's what I chose to do. It's like, you were really 11. Imagine if you had applied yourself.
Yeah, it's really emotional. Because if it changes one way or the other, it impacts other people, and it's emotional for many people involved. Not everyone. It depends on how how this feels to you and to your family.
First lesson in life, right after graduation.
Yep.
Nothing sometimes things don't go your way all the time.
Right. And for some students, that 8th semester is really what boosts them up and gets them over the finish line. And that's really important too.
I wonder how often that happens though. I mean, it happened in your case, I suppose.
I know 2 different situations that it happened, but the push from valedictorian to salutatorium, that's thank goodness the person who actually ranked as number 1 was really, I'm done. You did a fine job with your speech, and I'm moving on to college and life goes on.
Yes.
So, but not everybody is like that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard on families. It's hard on kids. But so there's 2 ways to look at it, right? There's a couple ways. One, how do you not count that last semester of school, right? We're required to honor those credits. So that's, those grades need to be part of the student's profile. For some students, that's really critical. The other thing to do, I suppose, is either postpone graduation till after grades close, which is not a tradition we've ever done. And then we're certain. But it also, what kind of preparation time does that give students for speeches, for ordering some material, school systems for ordering materials? So that's not a traditional thing either. It is, Chad and I spent a fair amount of time calling around to other systems in the state to find out how they manage this. And it's sort of all over the board, but everyone counts the grades. It's just a matter of the timing and what kind of recognition they offer.
It's very clear in writing that you need to be on your A game through 7 semesters. And they know that last semester is not going to count towards their class standing unofficially. And as long as they know, there shouldn't be a huge issue with it, I wouldn't think. I mean, it is disappointing, but.
And to be clear, because final transcript, if the student's going off to college, I'm not sure about the military, I'm not sure what their requirements are in terms of the final ranking of someone, but grades. But in many cases, students have to submit their final transcript. So it does include that last semester. So it is in the student's best interest to continue hanging in there in that last semester and trying to keep their grades stable or higher. So the second section, honors and awards, this just takes what is in the IKF policy that says we have honors and awards. It clarifies how long a student needs to be enrolled for those honors and awards to be recognized. The grade point average that each Latin honors level includes. If someone transfers in how that works. And then who's responsible for speaking at certain events, graduation and class day. And then that the speeches will be reviewed and a timeline for that to happen. And if someone is an early graduate, how that impacts them. It's something they should consider if they're graduating early. So that's outlined. That section hasn't changed a whole lot. It was really that bold portion under class standing for clarification purposes, making sure we're all on the same page, we all understand how it works, and that it aligns with the policy.
Have you, there was a situation where someone was in the top 10 and very academically inclined. And her senior year, she had all of the credits she needed. Her 8th semester, she didn't take full-time classes. She just took part-time classes and her standing was taken away from her.
So
And
that's in here. It says early graduates' grade point averages will not be figured into senior class rankings because they're
but
not
she
a
wasn't an
full-time
early
student.
graduate. She just had enough credits and she was still taking her classes that she needed to take, but she didn't need to be full-time.
Right, and the second sentence says students enrolled full-time for fewer than 4 semesters will be
Right.
eligible for academic honors. So this is all of this references full-time participation in school. And that can include all of the pathways outlined in IKF. So full-time enrollment can include dual enrollment. So it can include someone taking college classes, but enrolling in those college classes through our high school. And it can include, we have that.
I wonder, and that's an awesome opportunity for somebody to reduce their college expense. I wonder, I'm not sure if that was, I don't
An option
know.
at the time.
Right, I mean, I
Yeah.
know that there've always been options, I just don't know if it was proposed to this individual as an option.
To maintain full-time status, right? Because the student can now, so now the student can do that, take programming at the tech center. That a lot of them offer certification level, once they pass the assessment that goes with it.
Yeah, but the thing about it is if they've worked hard enough to where they don't have to take a full load there, say the last half of their senior year, they've worked hard. And they shouldn't be penalized because they got ahead of things and they don't,
So that gets back to seat time and earning credit, right? So we have this dual system that we're operating. You've learned, you've met proficiencies, you've learned what we've expected you to learn. And we have this seat time requirement in our system. And years ago, when we wrestled with this, the year before I came, it was this, I went through the minutes and this community wrestled with that and said seat time matters to us as much as proficiency. And so if we want to revisit that, we sort of have to look at that across the board, I think, rather than just at the last semester of someone's senior year. Because there's a lot of things tied to full-time enrollment. It's participation in, the senior activities, participation in extracurricular activities and co-curricular activities and GPA but what is interesting is I think we've probably increased our alternative pathways. So not only can you do the tech center or online or college and get ahead without an expense for your family, we do have opportunities for apprenticeships and internships. It takes a little extra work working with our school counseling offices, and there's a planning process through that to ensure that there's like an academic component on top of the applied learning component. But it's possible. And that will then that establishes full-time enrollment, but in a really modified way. Right, so the student's not coming for 4 80-minute blocks into Gardner Area High School every day. It's probably a much more modified plan, but it's one that's been proactively developed.
Is that something that's introduced? So if somebody is, do they choose their classes with advisors? I'm sorry.
Yep, that's a good question. We do have an advisory system, and part of that is going through class. There's a whole lot to advisory system, but one element is class selection and processes. And they also have an assigned school counselor. So there's two ways in which they can go through that process. And some students actually pick a teacher that they have a really good relationship with, who also might understand the field of study they're going with, and sit down with that person as well.
So there's plenty of people who can advise them, look, try this, so that's good. I just remember hearing the negatives about this person losing their standing.
Oh, yeah.
Not what the school did to possibly encourage the child. So I don't know that end of things.
And I don't either. I can only
So-
tell you what we have for opportunities now.
That's good.
And I think this is that part of that communication piece, right? How, what do we have in place to ensure effective and ongoing communication? So everyone's making the most informed decision along the way that benefits them for what they're wanting, what they want in their, life. Whether that's recognition, certifications, credits for college, with a reduced cost, there's all kinds of different opportunities. And if someone's going to part-time and there's a reason for that, and they, maybe they're working, but it doesn't fall under all these other categories, but they've earned all their credits, then that must have been hopefully we anticipate that's a conversation that's held with all the right parties, and it's a fully informed decision, hopefully.
I think I've seen that with my daughter, and I think with other teachers too, that she had a good connection with her advisor, her teacher advisor. And so if stuff came up, she could just have that conversation and then get to guidance or wherever it needed to go. So it's a little bit about having the conversation and saying, this is what I want. But, and I think the teachers are pretty tuned in, but if, it definitely helps to have that, what do I do here? I've got, too many study halls, or I want to make sure I have enough. But I think the teachers are pretty available for that.
That's great.
For that.
And that's the one thing, I think if you have a student that is in the situation where they might lose their class standing, I'm sure Chad or somebody would have that discussion with them, sort of like you did me last year when my daughter wanted to drop a class and she would be considered part-time. And she wouldn't be eligible for open school or anything like that. And, my comment was, well, if she keeps taking the class, she's just not getting it. She won't be eligible anyway. So I think we moved her into something else, but to keep her full-time. She already had enough credits.
Yeah.
But he had that discussion with me and her, so.
Yeah, and we're trying to put in a few more steps and processes which, sometimes that creates barriers. But in this case, especially with class standing, we're trying to do it in such a way to ensure that certain conversations are had explicitly and in a timely way.
Yeah.
With all the different people that could have those conversations. And hopefully this is one step, this class standing piece is one step.
I don't think you know what the issues are until you actually have them. And then you just have to try to figure out how not to repeat them.
Yeah, that's part of why we wanted to raise this. So I guess what I'd ask, since we've had a lot of discussion on it, and while there were, I wonder if someone could make a motion maybe, and if you're willing to vote on this, to include this adjustments to the class standing in the student handbook, recognizing that the IKF policy needs to include the language that was adopted in the spring on top 10. Something like that.
I would make the motion, but I don't remember everything you just said, so.
Can I just say so moved?
Well, let's have something so we all are really clear.
Okay.
So a motion, even if someone mimics it, unless there's disagreement. Adjusting IKF to include
Language about top 10.
that was previously approved. and approving adjustments to the GAHS student handbook class standing statements. Does that sound accurate?
Yep.
Okay, so you're saying you
Yep.
motion, Matt, Marshall. Anyone second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor? And opposed? And abstained. He's not a voting, he's not a voting member,
non-voting.
right? Non-voting.
He's just visiting.
Okay, so then,
And actually, this helps me, like, whenever we come back around to policy, and I'm sure Pat will get this, but, and bring it, when we need to, but just so that it helps me understand kind of,
yeah, all the
Were these-
steps.
where these are connecting.
Because it comes from here, it goes from here to the policy committee, to the board for its first read, to the board for its second read and final approval. Lot of steps.
Steps.
When it's related to policy. Under the handbook, we can approve that here,
Right, because
because that's not the broad overarching policy that's changing, but IKF will have to run through again
Yeah, I'm looking it up.
to find out. It might just be misposted, and if that's the case, that'll be easy. So we'll just have to look. So our next and final agenda item is the open campus policy Jhca revisions. So we copied and pasted most of the open campus policy in here and changed a little bit of language and realized we didn't redline it. So I want to just very quickly show you the original policy, and I'll be able to then talk you through where it changes. So posted online is Jhca right here under students, the J folder students. Almost all of this language is still present in the revision. Except what you'll notice in this policy when you saw it on your agenda is this particular policy actually has dates for the 2021 year. And the 1920 year. And policies, unless there was a specific situation that required that sort of adjustment, don't usually have a class year. So specifically, like the pandemic, spring 2020, that is in many of our policies because we adjusted like community service hours very specifically. But otherwise, we don't mention school years because the policy is for broadly to be applied across school years. So that's one adjustment that needed to be made in this policy. And it was last reviewed in August 2020. So it had included that, but anyway, so here we are moving into 21, 22, and we're realizing that the language doesn't always apply now because it had such specificity in the policy. So here we've reviewed it. The opening paragraph is the same. The second paragraph is not here. So we'll have to discuss if you want that, which I'm happy to put back in. It just says the MSAD11 board regards Opus campus privileges as a bridge between school life and the outside community, as an opportunity to exhibit ethical and responsible behavior away from the more structured school environment. So if that paragraph for it to set context for the policy suits you, we can just plug that back in. But the real content here is here. Juniors and seniors may leave school grounds during lunch and study halls at their discretion if, and then this is where a few generalizations were made to remove the year-specific language. And there was a couple sections in the original Jhca that were redundant. They said basically the same thing in two different sections, and so they combined them. So specifically, There must be a permission form on file in the main office, and then they combined a statement that says who signs that if the child is under 18. The next statement combined a bunch of statements about class standing into one consolidated statement. The student must be in good academic standing in all of their classes, which is honor roll status or higher. Eligible, and then how they check eligibility, which is in the original policy. And the privileges are subject to being revoked if the academic requirements are not maintained. And that was also in the original. The student is enrolled in at least 5 courses or 5 credits. And the student must have completed community service hours as outlined below. And then this is the adjustment we wanted to make. So I'll just go back here first. These have like highlights in them and it talks about semesters. So the difference here is it does that, right? We over, they've adjusted here to reflect what's accurate. And then down here, you approved, the board approved adjustments to, including starting at this committee, adjustments to community service hours due to the pandemic, and how that was going to result in changes for ongoing graduating classes, because they were enrolled in the high school at some point in the last 3 semesters. And so those are now reflected here. And then going back to letter D here, seniors and juniors, we'll resume with the class of 2025 because they hopefully will not be part of an impact on the pandemic now that we've gone back to our traditional, this fall, our traditional expectations for community service hours. So this element was put in instead of going year by year, we did it by graduating classes. And then there was a number of items about behavior in the last policy, and this was all consolidated to basically students will follow the policies, district and school rules and the code of conduct. And then if those are not followed, they may lose their privileges of open campus. So it's just consolidated into one statement and then allowing the principal and or the superintendent, depending on the level that it goes to revoke those open campus privileges with notification to families if that is to happen. So consolidated into one practice. And then the element that was added is that a parent or guardian may request that the privileges may be revoked as well. So a parent is, our guardian is required to sign off on the privileges and can also remove those privileges. And then the form would be removed from the office. That would be the procedure that would follow. So, questions on this?
Does the high school secretary have this easily? It's like if a student is going to leave and she goes to dismiss them, does it pop up to say, yes, they can? Or
Like in
I
Power
think
School
we-
or
something,
somewhere like
yeah.
Have that tracked in Power School? She must have a list, if not.
She sets it. She sets, there's all kinds of codes and she sets them.
There we go. There's a code.
There's a caution.
yeah.
There's always a code. Yeah, because it has to be approved before they're allowed
Right.
to be dismissed in that way.
Mhm.
The idea here is to just refine that original policy, make it clear, but be at the same time that we were going in to adjust for the pandemic changes in community service. We made those changes in another policy. We didn't remember to make them in, because we have so many policies, didn't remember to make them under open campus policy where they're also reflected. So those italicized hours are previously approved hours,
Mhm.
just consolidated by graduating class. It's just inserting them in here and being okay with that consolidation. It would still have to go to policy committee, but what we'd like is to be able to have this displayed in our handbook and then adjusted if, as it goes through policy committee and any other changes made, we can adjust from that, from our link to the official policy.
Yeah, the only other thing I'm noticing here, particularly the policy connection, is defining. The handbook does a great job in this section of defining when the pandemic is, which classes are impacted by COVID-19. Actually, the part that we just voted on also says that piece of, what's in the wrong spot, says, except for classes impacted by COVID-19. And I'm almost wondering if we either need a policy or just to make sure we go through and define what those years are. Again, like we define it well in the open campus policy, right? By these.
So actually, that's a great statement. So if you go back up here,
Do we?
except for classes impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, actually the only impact on grades by the COVID-19 pandemic was the spring 2020 semester.
Yes, right.
But the fall to spring 2020 to 2021 did not have GPA impacts. So we could open back your motion and amend it to include COVID-19 spring 2020 pandemic semester in the handbook language.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, to clarify it, yeah, for that session, for class standing, it was just that spring. It was just March, April, May, June of 2020, right?
Okay, since we haven't started a new motion on the other policy, why don't we have an amendment?
No,
An
sorry.
amended motion to clarify. So why don't you say it? Well, can you say it?
I don't
Is
think I
not
can say
voting?
it.
Can
Not
someone
read
who
yours.
can vote say it?
Huh?
Can someone who can vote say it?
Can I read your notes?
Sorry.
So
I've already in my brain moved on, sorry.
amend the JHCA class standing procedures to clarify or modify JHCA class standing procedures to clarify COVID-19 pandemic as spring 2020 except for classes impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic during the spring 2020 semester.
Does that carry for students, like community service wise, it carries for students throughout that, any cohort impacted by that?
Mhm.
Graduating seniors in June of 2020 had reduced credits, right?
But so did the 2020 to 2021 full year.
So
They also had reduced service learning credits, community service credits. So the only,
I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. With grades, it's only spring 2020. So basically you're asking us to change the language to make sure that when it comes to grades, it's only reflecting spring 2020 and connecting it to COVID-19 pandemic.
I think so. So the people are clear when they see the handbook, right? That's kind
Yeah,
of
that's where it
where the driver
matters.
is here. That
Can you just add like a note or an asterisk to say,
maybe.
like, spring 2020 GPA is not included in these class standings or something, or is exempt from inclusion or something?
Except for classes impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic during the spring 2020 semester,
Yeah, I mean, that's good too. It's fine with me.
or asterisks, but either will work. Well, so basically what we're asking is to modify the COVID-19 pandemic language to reference spring 2020.
Mhm.
To reference spring 2020.
So moved.
So moved.
1, 2. All in favor? Any
Thank you, Tony.
opposed?
I think I noticed it just as we're looking at this other, to jump back ahead, it's so beautifully laid out,
It's really clear.
like Yes, in the open campus section.
Yep.
I mean, that is detailed.
Yeah,
Uh,
because it was multiple semesters that things changed. And so we had to look back at what you approved and calculate how does that play out for each graduating class. And rather than doing that all the time, trying to get it in one spot where it will then be referenced by anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of this policy, are we in a place that it feels like it's solid and consistent and clear for the policy committee to review with the edits that were made here, which was consolidation of multiple statements saying the same thing,
Yep.
removal of the specific academic years, and an addition of the graduating classes impacted by pandemic as it relates to community service hours.
Which were increased.
Well, it should be the reflection. It's 15 hours a year.
Yeah.
So it's 60 total. So they have eight to do by the end of their senior year in the last semester, unless they've already done them. So that 60 has always been stable. This is just clarifying the timeline that allows for open campus privileges.
And we added the parent guardian can remove.
Yep, that was added as well. What I can do is redline it for the policy committee. But so who wants to make a motion to approve as rewritten?
I will. Policy Jhca, updated required community service hours. And adding parent guardian can remove from student from open school. And removal of the specific years in the policy. That cover everything?
Yep. Okay. So Matt, that's one. Who's seconding?
I can second.
Nicole, all approved. Who approves? Already unflipped. Okay, unanimous.
I gotta tell you, I absolutely love the way we vote now. That cuts off at least a half hour.
I know, I'm so lost because it's been so long.
I know, you're used to like, okay, I got,
One at a
you know,
time.
Yeah.
I kind of miss saying
I'm
yay.
after June.
Thank you. We've gone through all of the items on our agenda, which I recognize was a lot of detail, but because the academic year is upon us and we're trying to really increase our communication and clarity, especially as it relates to graduation, I appreciate you taking the time to go through this. I'll make sure, Tony, that your committee gets the ones that are impacted and we follow through with IKF and a Jhca, forward that to you and Pat. And our next meeting will be September 14th at 4:30.
And I think that's it.
Okay,
Thank you.
42, a few minutes late, but not too bad. Okay, thank you, everyone.
awesome. Thank you, thanks for having me.